Welcome back to the Global Economy Podcast. I'm your host, Christina, and today we are diving deep into a story that has reshaped an entire continent, the European energy and inflation crisis. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be unpacking what happened, why it happened, and what it means for the future Europe. I'm joined by three fantastic panel here. We have Fiza, an economist specializing in international finance. Fiza, great to have you.
Thank you, Kiss. It's been a fascinating, if terrifying, couple of years to be an economist.
Absolutely. And we have Mei, our policy analyst, who's been tracking government responses across European. Mei?
Hi Kiss. Yeah, from price caps to subsidies, it's been a whirlwind of policy action.
And finally, Carol, our environmental economist, who will help us connect this crisis to the bigger picture of green transition. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks, Kiss. It's a critical lens because the solutions to the crisis could either break our climate goals.
So, our objectives today are clear. First, we'll break down about the crisis background and its root causes. Then, we'll analyze the policy responses and their massive financial impact, and that will extract key lessons and recommendations. And finally, we'll wrap up with our conclusions. So, Fiza, let's start with you. Just how bad was this?
Thank you. To put in perspective, Christina, the International Monetary Fund estimates that the surge of fossil fuel prices in 2022 will raise the average European household cost of living by nearly 7%. We are talking about the most challenging economic and financial crisis in decades for Europe.
7% is staggering. So let's rewind. How did we get here, Mei? What were the initial triggers?
The immediate trigger was undoubtedly Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. It sent shockwaves through global energy markets, but the vulnerability was there long before. Europe, particularly Germany, had built up a decade-long of dependence on cheap Russian natural gas. Before the war, Russia supplied a massive 45% of the EU's gas imports.
And from an international finance perspective, this created a perfect storm. It wasn't just a supply shock, it was a cost push shock of immense proportions. As natural gas price skyrocketed, increasing eightfold in some cases, it directly fed into electricity prices because gas-fired power plants often set the wholesale price. This immediately translates into record high inflation across the Eurozone.
It's also important to remember that the ground was already shaky. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had supply chain bottlenecks and a surge in demand for goods, which require a lot of energy to produce. So when the war hit, it amplified existing pressure. It exposed the fragility of a system so heavily reliant on a single geopolitically risky fossil fuel supplier.
So, it's a mix of long-term dependency and a sudden geopolitical shock. What were the immediate economic consequences, Fiza?
Hyperinflation, Christina. We saw inflation rates hitting double digits in many European countries for the first time in a generation. The European Central Bank had to act aggressively. In September 2022, they implemented their largest ever interest rate hike. This was a classic central bank response to tame inflation, but it also risked tipping economy into recessions by making borrowing more expensive for everyone.
And it wasn't just about high bills. There was a genuine fear of physical shortage. Government drew up plans for factory closing, rolling blackouts, and energy rationing for the winter. The very real possibility of the socially fracturing event was on the table.
So, facing both inflation crisis and physically supply crisis, how did governments respond? May, this is your area.
Yeah, governments threw everything at it. Initially, the response was broad-based and expensive. According to the IMF, many countries used untargeted measures like broad subsidies and on energy bills, tax cuts on fuel, and also price control to try and suppress the pain for everyone. Think of Germany, France, and UK announcing multi-billion euro relief packages.
But that had to cost a fortune, right? How did they afford that with debt levels already high?
Exactly. It put immense strain on public finances. However, we also saw most of the innovative approaches. The most notable was the Iberian solution, implemented by the Spain and Portugal.
Right, and that's a fascinating case study. Instead of subsidizing the final bill, they intervened directly in the wholesale electricity market. They put a cap on the price of gas used for electricity generation.
And that's where international finance get interesting. The intervention directly tackled the root of the problem, the windfall profit being made by inframarginal electricity producers like nuclear, hydro, and renewables whose costs hadn't gone up, but who were benefiting from the high electricity price set by expensive gas plants. One study estimated these procedures saw their earnings increase by roughly 15 billion. The Iberian solutions effectively closed some of those drains back and transferred the saving to consumer.
It also highlighted the trade-off. While it lowered consumer bills, providing almost 60% of the total relief household, so it also had an unintended consequences. It lowered electricity price so much that it actually increased electricity exposed to France, and to meet the demand led to an increase in gas-fired generations and carbon emissions in Spain. It shows you can't just look at one country in isolations.
So, a great short-term relief but with potential environmental costs. Meanwhile, what was the European as a bloc doing?
The EU launched RE-Power EU. This was a comprehensive plan with three main pillars. First, saving energy. They set a voluntary target to reduce gas demand by 15%, and incredibly, between August 2022 and January 2025, the EU successfully reduced gas demand by 17%. Second, diversifying supplies. They massively increased LNG imports from places like the US and Norway, which reducing Russian pipeline gas imports from 45% to just 19% by 2024. Third, accelerating clean energy. This involves pouring billions into renewable and energy efficiency.
And don't forget the financial mechanism. A lot of this is funded through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. We are talking about 35 billion for energy efficiency and renewables and another 17 billion for fixing grid bottlenecks. It's a massive fiscal injection and a structural change.
And this is crucial. The crisis acted as a massive accelerator. Germany, for example, passes a key reform to ramp up its offshore wind target to 70 GW by 2045. The long-term goal is to solve the problem of energy dependency by simply not needing the fossil fuels in the first place.
So we've seen the firefighting. Now, looking back, what are the big lessons? Carol, let's start with you on the environmental front.
The biggest lesson is that climate policy and energy security are two sides of the same coins. The faster you transition to domestically produce renewable, the more insulated you are from global fossil fuel price shock. A second lesson is that not all crisis measures are created equal. Broad-based price subsidies, while politically easy, are expensive, regressive, that they help the rich as much as the poor. And they dull the incentive to save energy. Targeted income support for vulnerable households is far more efficient and fair.
From a financial stability perspective, I would like to add that we need to acknowledge and manage the distributional conflict inherent in such shocks. Energy price shocks are effectively a massive transfer of wealth from consumer and some businesses to energy producer. If left unchecked, this can lead to what called conflict inflations, where workers demand higher wages to keep up and firms raise prices further to protect profit, creating a wage price spiral. Policy like windfall profit taxes on energy companies, as seen in some countries, are a way to manage that conflict and recycle that money back into the economy.
Building on that, a key policy lesson is the importance of the upstream intervention versus downstream ones. The Iberian solution showed that intervening where the prices is set in the wholesale market, it can be more effective and less costly to the public than cutting taxes on retail bills after the fact. Another big lesson is the power of collective action. The Europeans joint gas purchasing platform aggregated EU, which aggregated demand for over 119 billion cubic meters of gas, gave European companies collective bargaining power they never had before.
So, targeted help for people, interventions at the source of problem, and using collective power. Fiza, any final lessons for central banks?
Absolutely. Central banks learned that they can't just look through energy price spike anymore. When shock are this large and persistent, they fit into core inflation and inflation expectations, but they also can't fight the battle alone. The ECB's Christine Lagarde emphasized a data-dependent and meeting-by-meeting approach, acknowledging the exceptional uncertainty. Monetary policy needs to be complemented by smart fiscal policy, like the investment in REP Power EU to address the supply side constraints that are the root cause of the problem.
We've covered a lot of ground. Let's try to tie this all together. Fiza, what is your final takeaway?
Thank you, Christina. For my final takeaway is that Europe has proven to be remarkably resilient. It faced an exponential energy threat, and through a combination of market forces and policy, managed to stabilize the situations. Inflation is back near to 2% target, and the economy is slowly growing. The challenges now is to ensure the temporary crisis measures don't become permanent crutches and that the transition to a more stable green economy continues.
I would echo that. The crisis was a stress test for European solidarity and policy making. The rapid diversification away from the Russian gas was our astounding logistically achievement. The long-term lesson is the need for deeper integration by completing the banking union, the capital market union, and truly integrating energy grids to make the single market more shock-proof.
From my perspective, the crisis was a sharp warning. It shows the colossal economic and social danger of fossil fuel dependency. The silver lining is that it has poured rockets fuel under the green transitions. The investment in renewable and efficiency being made now are the best insurance policy against future crises. We just have to make sure we don't get distracted and stay the course.
A stark warning, but also a story of resilience and adaptation. The European energy crisis was a perfect storm, but it may ultimately accelerate the creation of a more sustainable and secure energy future. A huge thank you to our guests today, Fiza, Mei, and Carol, for these insightful discussions.
Thanks, kids.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us review. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the global economy.
Bye!